Christine Belford was not a public figure. She wasn't a social media person, and she never imagined that her life would one day be judged by thousands of strangers through a screen. Christine was just a mother living in Delaware. Mornings spent driving her children to school, afternoons preparing meals, weekends taking them to church, teaching Sunday school to other kids. Her life was simple, repetitive, filled with ordinary worries. She wasn't perfect. Like any mother, Christine sometimes felt tired, sometimes impatient. But one thing never changed. Her children were the center of her world. After her marriage fell apart, Christine became both mom and dad. She learned to be strong, learned to protect her children in a world that often showed no kindness. She believed that as long as she lived right and loved enough, everything would eventually be okay. Christine didn't know that some people don't care about the truth. They only want a story that fits their anger. And this ordinary woman, after just one video, was no longer seen as a mother at all. The courtroom was resting in a fragile sense of calm when the prosecution called its next witness. Not a police officer, not an expert, but a woman who stepped up to the stand with a sleepless, pale face and eyes reddened from too much crying. Kim Bowling, the sister of the man who had died. She did not look in Sarah's direction. She stood upright, her hands gripping the wooden railing as if letting go would make her collapse. Her voice trembled from the very first sentence. This was not the voice of someone arguing right or wrong. This was the voice of someone who had lost everything. She spoke about her 5-year-old niece, the little girl who woke up that morning and called for her parents like she always did. But instead of the familiar answer, she saw 2 motionless bodies on the floor. Blood, silence, the cold air of death. A scene that would follow her for the rest of her life. In that moment, the courtroom was no longer a place of law. It became a vessel of grief. Some people lowered their heads. Some covered their mouths. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Kim Bowling continued, her voice breaking with every word. The 2 people who died were not just victims. They were a father, a mother, a brother, a son to an elderly mother who still waited for a phone call every night. One of them was a man born with an imperfect heart, one that had never stopped fighting just to live a little longer, day by day. She did not ask for pity. She asked for protection. For the children who were still alive. For the community. And for the memory of those who had died. When she finished, silence blanketed the room. And in that moment, the smile that had once flickered across Sarah's face disappeared entirely. Thursday morning, the 20th of February 2025. It was still early. The quiet suburban air of Carrollton, Georgia, had not yet been disturbed. The house on Tyus Road sat still, just like any other morning. No one knew that inside it, a tragedy had taken place hours earlier. Around 7:15 a.m., a 5-year-old girl woke up. She climbed out of bed, following the same morning routine. She went to look for her parents, but when the bedroom door opened, her world changed forever. On the floor lay her father, James Brock, 45 years old, motionless. Her mother, Kristen Brock, 41, beside him. Blood on the floor. No sound, no breath, no life left. A moment no child should ever have to witness. Her scream shattered the morning silence. The panicked cry echoed through the house. Sarah Grace Patrick ran into the room. She grabbed her younger half-sister, trying to soothe her with words she herself could barely believe. The little girl trembled in her arms. Everything was too big, too terrifying, too much. Finally, Sarah called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived. Their hardened expressions shifted the moment they entered the bedroom. The victims had been shot multiple times, at close range. No signs of struggle. Nothing in the house disturbed. No forced entry. No broken windows. Only a bedroom door left slightly open, as if the killer had walked in like someone familiar and walked out in silence. The house was quickly sealed off. Yellow tape stretched across the yard. Patrol car lights flickered over the dew-wet grass. Forensic technicians began their work. Every drop, every bullet mark, every smallest trace was carefully documented. A chilling thought crept into the minds of those at the scene. This was not the work of a stranger. The killer knew this house, knew the timing, knew the habits, knew exactly where the couple would be when they felt safest. Amid the chaos, another question quietly surfaced. What would happen to the children who were still alive? Who would protect them after such a horrific morning? No one knew then that the answer to that question would later lead them to a truth even more haunting than the blood-stained scene before them. After that horrifying morning, while the crime scene was still far from settling, another reality immediately came into focus. Where would the surviving children go? Who would care for them? Who would take responsibility when an entire family had collapsed overnight? Caitlin O'Keefe stepped forward to take in the two girls, an old acquaintance of the family, a familiar face, familiar enough to feel safe. Sarah went to her new home in silence. No resistance, no breakdown. Everything unfolded with an uncanny calmness. Just a few days after the funeral, Sarah returned to school. The familiar hallways, the same old desks, the class bell ringing as if nothing had happened. Teachers and classmates watched her cautiously, waiting for an outburst, a collapse, a delayed wave of tears, but nothing came. Sarah arrived on time, sat neatly at her desk, completed her work, answered when called. Her voice normal, her expression normal. Far too normal for a girl who had lost both her parents only days earlier. A few teachers began to feel uneasy. Not because Sarah was acting out, but because she wasn't. Because of the calmness that felt almost cold. No one demanded tears, but no one was prepared for absolute stillness either, as if every emotion had been locked away somewhere deep inside her. At home, Sarah helped set the table, played with the younger child, did her homework, spoke politely. No anger, no rebellion, no outward sign of the trauma she had just endured. To many, she looked like a strong child, resilient, composed, moving forward. But to those more perceptive, a question began to form. How could a 17-year-old stand so firmly after her entire world had collapsed? Was this resilience, or was it the hollow space where feelings had disappeared? No one dared say it aloud. But the unease quietly grew. Because in cases like this, sometimes the most frightening thing isn't the crying. It's the silence that lasts too long. Catalyst Church was packed on the day of the farewell service. Every wooden pew was filled. People stood lining the hallways. The air hung heavy with the scent of white flowers and the muffled sobs people tried to hold back. This was not just a funeral. It was a moment for the community to say goodbye to two people who had lived, who had loved, who had tried to hold their family together with everything they had. Friends and relatives stepped up one by one, voices trembling, words broken, tears falling freely. Some had to stop halfway, unable to continue. Their pain was obvious in every breath. It was real pain, raw, unpolished, undeniable. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood and walked to the podium. Small frame, young face, eyes looking straight ahead. No bowing, no trembling hands. When Sarah began to speak, the church fell silent. She said goodbye to her mother, spoke of familiar things, said she had never imagined a day she would lose them, spoke of her stepfather and the lessons he had taught her, said his flawed heart was now healed in heaven. Her sentences were smooth, coherent, almost flawless. But what unsettled people was something else entirely. Throughout her entire speech, not a single tear fell. Her voice remained steady, calm, no cracks, no breaks, no wavering. It sounded less like a grieving daughter saying her final words to the people she had just lost forever, and more like a carefully prepared speech read aloud without hesitation. Below, many bowed their heads in tears. A few exchanged subtle glances. Something felt wrong. When the entire room was drowning in grief, her composure felt out of place, so calm it was almost frightening. Some people reassured themselves. Everyone grieves differently. Maybe Sarah was in shock. Maybe the loss hadn't fully reached her yet. But from that moment on, a tiny seed of doubt was planted. And with time, that seed would grow large enough to shake everything people thought they knew about the 17-year-old girl standing at that altar without a single tear. The suspicion did not come from the crime scene, not from the forensic reports, but from an entirely different world, social media. Before the tragedy, Sarah was like many other 17-year-old girls. She spent hours scrolling through TikTok, watching videos, following trends, but among the endless entertainment, the content that captivated her most was true crime. Murder cases, investigative breakdowns, chilling psychological analyses. She watched a lot, so much that she became familiar with every trope of the genre. And then, after her parents died, Sarah did something the investigators could not ignore. She began messaging true crime content creators, not just one, but several, across multiple platforms: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and the messages were almost identical, as if they had been drafted in advance. Sarah introduced her parents' murder as a story, a gripping topic. She said it was an interesting case, something audiences would enjoy, not a plea for help, not an expression of grief, but a pitch for content. One creator read the message and felt a chill run down their spine. Something was wrong. No one in mourning talks about the death of their parents that way. They took screenshots, preserved the timestamps, and immediately alerted the police. And they weren't the only one. More messages surfaced. Same structure, same tone, same intent. It was as if Sarah was trying to push the story into the public sphere before anyone had the chance to question her role in it. To the defense, this was simply a confused teenager trying to process trauma through what felt most familiar to her. But to the prosecution, those messages meant something far more sinister. This wasn't grief. It was control. Control over how the story would be told. Control over how the public would perceive the tragedy. As if Sarah understood perfectly the power of public opinion, of views, of viral narratives. From that moment on, everything she had done earlier was re-examined under a different light. The calmness, the tearless eulogy, the smile in the courtroom, all the pieces began to align, forming a picture that sent shivers through those who saw it. Because in the world of true crime, one thing is often true. The person who understands too well how a story is told is sometimes the very person who wrote it. There was one detail that few people noticed at first. No blood, no weapon, just sound. James Brock carried a special medical device inside his body, a heart assist machine that kept him alive day by day. That device did not stay silent when something was wrong. It emitted loud, sharp, urgent alarms, a sound designed to be impossible to ignore. In her statement to police, Sarah admitted something important. That night, she heard the alarm from her stepfather's life support device, a very specific moment right before she went to sleep. The sound was clear enough for her to remember, long enough for her to describe in detail. But then, Sarah said she did nothing. She didn't leave her room, didn't check, didn't wake her mother, didn't call for help. She simply lay down and went to sleep. That alone was something many people struggled to comprehend. A 17-year-old girl, living in the same house, hearing the life-saving alarm of her stepfather blaring loudly, yet choosing to turn away and sleep. No fear, no curiosity, no concern, no instinctive reaction. And the real contradiction lay here. Sarah said she heard the device's alarm, but she said she did not hear the gunshots, multiple shots, inside a quiet house, in the middle of the night, only a few meters away. No major barriers, no loud noises to mask them. Investigators fell silent when they heard this explanation, because they knew one thing very well. A medical alarm might be misinterpreted, but gunfire cannot be. It tears through the air. It hits the chest with vibration. It wakes even the heaviest sleepers. The defense tried to explain it away. Teenagers sleep deeply. Fatigue dampens reaction. People perceive sound differently. But the more they explained, the clearer the contradiction became. If Sarah was alert enough to notice and remember the medical alarm, how could she possibly sleep through the shots that ended 2 lives in the same house? That sound, not the only evidence, but the one thing that could not be erased, twisted, or denied. And from that moment on, investigators began to believe that Sarah did not merely hear something that night. She may have known exactly what was happening. The hearing slowly approached its end. The final arguments were delivered in a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. Sarah's attorney spoke of her age, a 17-year-old girl, a child raised in a fractured home, carrying wounds adults never bothered to see. They spoke of opportunity, of rehabilitation, of how Sarah needed healing, not imprisonment. Then the prosecution stood. No raised voices. No theatrics. They simply and quietly pieced the fragments back together. The unsettling calm after the murders, the cold TikTok messages, the ignored medical alarm, the contradictions that no explanation could fix. Each detail landed like a hammer, striking into the silence of the room. Then came the victim's family, an aunt, a 12-year-old boy, too young to stand before the court, sending his pain through a few written lines. I trusted her like my own sister. I don't understand how everything became like this. His words held no accusations, yet they crushed the chests of everyone listening. Sarah lowered her head. No more smiles. No more confident glances. Her shoulders drew inward, a teenage girl sitting in a crowded room, and yet somehow utterly alone. The judge looked down at the case file, then directly at the defendant. His voice was low and firm. After reviewing all statements, the court determined that the defendant posed a danger to the community and to witnesses. The request for bail was denied. The courtroom seemed to freeze for a few breaths. The door to the holding cell closed behind Sarah. No loud slam, just a dry, short sound. But it was the sound of a boundary sealing shut. The girl who had walked into the courtroom with confidence was now a defendant, facing some of the most serious charges imaginable. Outside, life went on. But behind the walls of the jail, Sarah's time began to move differently. Slower, colder, and far, far heavier. When the trial adjourned, the story did not end. It simply stepped out of the courtroom and into the minds of those who had listened, who had watched, who found themselves asking the same question. How could a tragedy this large be born from inside a home? There were no more images of guns, no more horrifying crime scenes. What lingered the longest was the chill down the spine, because this was not a story about sudden rage or a moment of lost control. It was the long, accumulating silence, the quiet decisions to look away, the reactions that were not reactions at all. Some saw Sarah as a monster. Others saw a child wounded too early, too deeply, to the point her emotions had long gone numb. Perhaps the truth sits somewhere in between, where a person is both a victim of circumstance and someone who must still answer for her own choices. Those who are gone will never return. Melissa will forever remain the mother, with rushed dinners and clumsy attempts to hold her family together. James will always be the man with a failing heart, who still tried to learn what it meant to be a father. They left behind gaps no one can ever fill. And Sarah, the teenage girl who once smiled in court, who once stood before coffins without shedding a tear, must now face a very different future. A future shaped by what has been done, by questions she may never be able to fully answer. The resonance of the case does not lie in the final verdict, but in the quiet warning it leaves behind, that the line between numbness and guilt is sometimes terrifyingly thin, that small signs, if ignored, can spiral into consequences that cannot be undone, and that in a modern world where every story can become content, the most frightening thing is not death captured on record, but the moment a person learns to narrate their own pain and no longer feels anything at all.